Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman. I have an amendment to the rule.
The gentleman will.
And again, I just want to make clear for the record, we support tax cuts for working families. We just don't support tax cuts for the very wealthy in this country, the millionaires and billionaires and big corporations. So I have another amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an amendment number 78 offered by myself, which prevents tax cuts for people earning over $1 million per year. So Republicans on this committee have made it clear that they're looking out for the interests of billionaires ahead of regular people by rejecting the last amendment, which would have prioritized working and middle-class people. You talk about the deficit and making tough choices all the time. I get it. But if you're truly concerned about the deficit and the debt, I think we can start by making the richest people in this country pay their fair share. So I'm offering this amendment, which is very simple. It prevents tax cuts for people earning over $1 million per year. Fewer than 1% of people in this country earn $1 million or more per year, and those people should pay what they owe. So a yes vote on this amendment prevents those making $1 million a year from getting another tax handout. A no vote, just to remind my Republican colleagues, is a vote to put people making over $1 million ahead of school teachers and firefighters, nurses, and police officers.
Is there any further discussion on Mr. McGovern's amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Mr. McGovern requests roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Any further discussion?
Madam Chairwoman, hard to believe that last vote, but I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 79 offered by myself, which prevents tax cuts for people earning over $100 million per year. Madam Chair, every Republican just voted in lockstep to keep our unfair tax system where billionaires pay a lower effective tax rate than working people. But I want to highlight how out of touch my friends are. Let's go from people earning $1 million a year to $100 million a year. I mean, surely you must think if someone makes $100 million a year, you shouldn't pay less in taxes than an average worker, right? Now, I did some research, and there are less than a dozen CEOs in this country who earn that much. Again, a yes vote on this amendment prevents people earning over $100 million per year from getting another tax break. So you should vote no if you want to side with the millionaires and billionaires over working people.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed
That's
to.
for a roll call.
The gentleman asked for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to, and I make one more quick comment about taxes. It's true the share of taxes paid by the top 1% actually hit new heights after the TCJA was enacted. Is there further
Yes.
discussion?
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 80, offered by myself, which prevents tax cuts for people with a net worth over $1 billion. Republicans on this committee just voted to protect tax breaks for people earning over $100 million per year. So I want to see how far they'll go. Will my Republican colleagues join Democrats to prevent tax breaks for billionaires? I mean, billionaires? There are 748 billionaires in the United States. That's it. And a lot of them pay a lower effective tax rate than the people we represent because of all the loopholes that you've been successful in getting into the tax code. So I asked my colleagues, who do you stand with? Your constituents or the billionaires? So a yes vote on this amendment means you stand with your constituents. A no vote is to vote to protect the 748 billionaires in this country from paying what they should pay in taxes.
Madam Chair,
Any further? Yep, Mr.
I
Scott.
would just like to point out that municipal bonds, those people own a tremendous amount of municipal bonds, and the gamesmanship in their actual tax rate, a lot of it comes from the fact that they're the ones that are actually buying the bonds to build the hospitals, the water systems, and everything else. Now, if you want to take away tax-exempt bond interest, then let me tell you something. You want to hurt a lot of the people in this country, take away the tax-exempt bonds from them.
My heart is aching for the billionaires, who, by the way, keep a lot of the money to themselves. So again, this is about whether
The money goes to build hospitals, schools. Yeah, just the facts. I know they get in the way sometimes.
Well, I disagree. So this is very clear. You can try to explain that to your constituents at a town hall.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Griffith.
Madam Chair, I'm just wondering, I don't know of any agency that keeps track of our net worth. So this would actually require expenditures in order to have an agency determine what the net worth of every American is. I think that's bad policy. I yield back.
But, and I also don't know how Mr. McGovern knows that these people pay less than other people. I'm not sure how you get that kind of information.
I can give you, I'm going to insert in the record a number of articles that will help explain that to all of you, okay?
Well, they're not government agencies,
They're
I would
not.
submit.
That's
Therefore,
right.
therefore, we'd have to create a government agency to determine the net worth of all Americans in order to make this amendment in order or proper.
Okay, I'm going to call the question.
Well-
I'm going to call the question.
Well, there's some people who want to debate.
There's
Well,
debate,
you-
there's
this
debate.
is
I'd like to
debated.
have debate.
You're going to cut off debate on this?
I will shortly. Mr. Neguse?
I thank the chairwoman for her indulgence. I would just say, Mr. Griffith, again, let's just have an honest debate. Your concern cannot possibly be that you are worried that this will require an expenditure to create a new government agency to calculate the net worth of 740 people in a country of 330 million people, 740 billionaires, whom Mr. McGovern has made a reasonable amendment to simply suggest that perhaps these tax cuts shouldn't go to the 740 richest people in a country of 330 million people. None of these people are your constituents, I suspect. That the 740 billionaires in this country don't live in your district. There are a lot of people in your country, in your constituency, earning a living wage, and those are the people that Mr. McGovern seeks to protect. So you can take the stance that Mr. Scott did regarding municipal bonds, and I appreciate his point on that. I disagree with him, but nonetheless, that's a reasonable position to take. But this notion that the government is incapable of calculating net worth of billionaires, and therefore we should let them off the hook and have whatever tax cuts they please, spare me, please. I mean, I yield back.
Thank you for yielding back. Ms.
Madam
Leisure
Chair?
Fernandez.
Yeah, I'd like to cede time to the ranking member.
I just want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record from the Oxford Review of Economic Policy, what is the average federal individual income tax rate on the wealthiest Americans? And also the secret IRS files, trove of never-before-seen records reveal how the wealthiest avoid income tax in our country. And you know what? We should actually do a hearing on how people hide their wealth and how they play games. But I mean, there's a list of here, from Warren Buffett to Jeff Bezos to Michael Bloomberg to Elon Musk, shows what their true tax rate they pay is. And quite frankly, their effective tax rate is oftentimes less than a police officer or a nurse. There's something wrong.
Without objection.
Ms.
Okay.
Okay, and, I think we need to remember that it is the job of the Internal Revenue Service to receive and to determine what the taxes are. And we are passing a resolution that's going to set up a tax cut for those billionaires. And with regards to who we represent, Mr. Griffith, I would note that you represent the most people utilizing SNAP to put food on the table for their families, and the second highest number of people on Medicaid in this committee. And so the question is, are you going to be standing with those 740 billionaires and saying, I don't think they deserve this tax cut when it's going to come out of SNAP and Medicaid? I think that's what the amendment is going to, is are we going to be standing with the 740 billionaires, many of whom are constantly cheating on their taxes, which is another issue. But I think that that's the point that this amendment is making, is who are you standing with? Your own constituents, it's 156,146 constituents on Medicaid, 57,000 constituents on SNAP, or those 740. With that, I yield back.
Let's not let this mystery go very long. We'll find out who's voting how. The questions on
Madam
the...
Chairwoman, I don't want her, I just
sorry.
want to insert one thing in the record, and I'll be quick. It's an article by the Tax Foundation explaining how the wealthiest taxpayers paid the highest effective tax rates in 2019. I know that data is updated, and since then, there's articles since then, but that the overall effective tax rates for the wealthiest 0.001% were at 41%, 47% when you include international, and it goes down the list, and overwhelmingly, it's the highest percentage of their income and percentage that is going to insert that in the record.
Without objection, we will enter that in the record. The question is on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
As for recorded vote.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.